Definitely true and well said. And it's amazing that people kind of saying that there was this huge drop-off with the XFL, a big failure. But in reality, it was way more successful than the USFL. And in reality, the ratings were, at first, obviously better than World Series, better than the NBA Finals, like you mentioned. But with the XFL, why do you think, is it almost like the bad luck of the XFL? Is that why people kind of view it?
Yeah, I think, look, there's two big reasons. One is they were predisposed to not liking the idea of Vince McMahon getting into football. So right out of the gate, you're looking at people. I mean, the minute he announced the league, people were making fun of him because, the sports world does not love WWE. I love when I'm around. In fact, I'm in Houston right now for the Super Bowl, and we produce a bunch of events, and people keep walking up to me and go, "God, I'm so excited to see the film," and blah blah. By the way, I like WWE even though it's fake, and I'm like, okay, but Vince said it was fake like 26 years ago. So what are you like? You know what I mean? Like they don't want to accept the fact that what he does is entertainment, that it's a modern soap opera and all this other stuff. So I think out of the gate they did it. The second thing is I think the real reason people think of it as a failure is because it didn't last. So this crash in ratings over the course of the 8 weeks, which was, look, it's the most historic crash of ratings ever. They went from the highest rating on a Saturday night in almost 2 decades to the lowest rating in the history of prime time. And I think that if you look at the role that the media and other and outlets like ESPN, frankly, played in sort of fanning the flames of failure in terms of how they talked about it and what they said about people, that clearly contributed to the league not working. And I think that was, unfortunate, because I do think that if you look at the state of sports in America right now, professional sports, the XFL would have helped enormously, to make the league way more fan-friendly in a way that I think that right now the leagues really aren't. They're very corporately minded because they're chasing advertising dollars, and then that's because they're owned by, 32 billionaires as opposed to one company. And the second thing is, networks are losing a ludicrous amount of money owning the rights. ESPN, Fox, CBS, NBC, they're going to lose close to $1 billion each over the course of their current NFL deals. And the XFL would have ended that. So, I do think there's a tragedy in it not working.
It's funny. I think I saw CBS lost $120 million, Fox lost $120 million within a year, but XFL only lost $37 million in a year. So in comparison, right? Is that correct? Those numbers not really that big of a failure.
Right. No. Well, not only that though. It's even less than that. They lost $37 million the year that they produced the XFL, but as part of the deal, this is not talked about very much. But part of the deal between NBC and WWE when they formed the XFL is that NBC bought into the WWE. So if you remember in 2001, the WWE went public, and NBC got a piece. They bought a piece of that public offering. So it's entirely conceivable, though I haven't looked at the numbers specifically, but I've talked to a handful of people at NBC. It's entirely conceivable that they actually made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on the deal because WWE stock has done so incredibly well over the last, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually would argue that, if you ask anyone involved in the deal at NBC, executives, anyone that was in an executive position, not talent, not Costas or something like that, but somebody who really, is involved in the deal making, they would tell you 100% that they do that deal again every day and twice on Friday, because the value of the deal is entirely the business operation. Had it worked, that's work or not work, it's a risk worth taking for sure.
Definitely, and I feel like with the XFL and with Vince, obviously he's a huge personality with himself, and you getting to interview him for this is basically one of the main reasons that I think people should absolutely love wanting to watch this, because of the unprecedented access. How did you kind of, maintain that almost like I don't even know how to word it, but it's almost like you get this unprecedented access. How do you get that with Vince, and what's the day like almost spending it with him?
Well, it's funny because I've known Vince since I was 5 years old. And so and we go years without seeing each other. And then, I'll figure out a way to get over to Stamford or get it to a Raw or something like that so I can hang out with him a little bit. It was a very different experience interviewing him because, the challenge with an interview like that is you have to press him so that he'll go to the places you want him to go. And I've never been in a position where I've been pressing my father or Vince McMahon very much at all. So it was a very nerve-wracking day because I interviewed my father, and then the very next day did Vince, and then that night we did the dinner. So in 48 hours, I did both of them and the dinner. So it was an extraordinarily anxiety-filled day. And here's the thing about Vince. He's brutally honest, and he's not really afraid to talk about anything. So on some level, I felt a certain degree of responsibility to try to maintain a certain level of decorum in asking the questions and not going off on tangents, because God knows there were about 800,000 things I wanted to ask him about, but I also wanted to make a film about a specific thing. So I got through my questions that I was asking him and then had an additional 15 that I was like, well, we have a little extra time.
That is great, and it's almost unbelievable. So certainly from our aspect to be able to get to interview Vince, I mean, it's such a cool kind of experience for sure. And I feel like so many things with Vince, and even from your father, almost like you said, stolen in a certain extent as far as TV, but people won't admit it because it's wrestling or people don't want to give credit. Do you think the XFL should have gotten more credit for the NFL, especially for the Sky Cam and even some of their players and certainly some of the personality?
Hell yes. And it's why it was so important to me that Jerry Jones was in the film, because Jerry in the film cops all that. He says they were really, really good ideas for presenting our game, and we used them today. Like Jerry is the closest thing, if not, he's a long lost brother of Vince McMahon. I mean, the two of them are world-class promoters who understand, one, the value of great showmanship, and two, understand the value of shaking hands and making it mean something. And so he's been a lifelong friend of my father, and he is a new friend of Vince's now once they did WrestleMania last year. Excuse me. So it's a remarkable – his participation in the film was remarkably important to me because I really wanted to drive home his feelings, which were these guys invented something really amazing. I was watching them very closely because it scared me to death that they were doing it, and I wanted to see what they were going to do together. And when they didn't work, I wanted all of their ideas to get brought in. I also think, by the way, not only was it important to them to take the ideas, but then they worked very, very hard the next time the contract was up to get my father back into the fold with the NFL, because they lacked that level of innovation, and that's how Sunday Night Football really came to be, was because of the XFL laying that groundwork.
Now, as I start to wind it down a bit here, I'm very curious. Obviously, interviewing Vince is definitely a huge highlight, but what was your favorite part of making this documentary?
Well, first of all, Bob Costas and Matt Vasgersian and John Coachman are so funny in this documentary that their interviews were hilarious. Actually, this didn't make it in the film, but again, this is why I'm so excited to do your podcast. You'll appreciate this. I did get to play out a couple of fantasies. For one, at one point in time, I said to Coachman, I was like, what did you think about the Skycam? And as he started answering, well, I think, and I was like, it doesn't matter what you think, which, by the way, was the highlight of my entire process. Everything else was irrelevant after I got that done. And then he came to the premiere, and we've done a series of interviews, and he's interviewed me on camera now like 3 times, and all 3 times I've done it to him. And after every interview, I'm like, dude, you have to see it coming now. Like, come on, man. Like, I'm doing this to you. He's interviewing me after. You should watch this, by the way. He's interviewing me after the show tonight on Facebook Live. And I'm hopefully he's not listening to this. I'm going to once again, of course, attempt to do this again because, frankly, I get no greater joy than impersonating The Rock.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to have to tune into that and check that out. That's awesome. But, you mentioned that's an awesome story. You mentioned The Rock and stuff. But do you have a favorite Saturday night's main event story? I know you told that great Hogan story we were hanging out, but do you have another kind of awesome stories for maybe Hogan or for Saturday night's main event?
There are two Hogan stories. Have you heard the White Castle one?
No, nope.
Oh, okay. So this one's Costas's because I was too young to know this, but this is one of my favorite stories. So Costas and Deerdorf they covered an event during the run. I don't remember when, but finish, and they're in. I'll make this up. They're in Kansas City or Memphis or St. Louis or something like that, and it's like they finish and the show's done. And they're wrapping up and everything. It's like 2 a.m. and Hogan and Andre are starving, and Costas and Deerdorf are in tuxedos and don't want to go home quite yet. So they all pile into Vince's limo without Vince, and they start driving around looking for a restaurant. Now, Hogan is basically still in his outfit. He has a jacket on, but he's still wearing his tights, his undershorts. And Andre is in half of his outfit as well. And it's 2 a.m., and they pull up to a White Castle, which is the only restaurant open at 2 a.m., and they walk in and sit. There's only one other patron in the whole place who's this guy who's drunk and passed out on a table. And the guy looks up right as Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant and Bob Costas in a tuxedo walk by to order, 60 or 70 hamburgers. And the guy looks up and then passes out right back into his French fries as he walks by, to which Bob Costas responded, "This would be the only logical reaction to that image." My next documentary, I hope, gets to be Saturday night's main event, because if the XFL is pretty funny, Saturday night's main event has to be the funniest thing that ever existed.
That's I'm just picturing Bob Costas' voice saying it that way. But the way we usually like to end it, though, we love to get, what the legacy is, for a performer. So when we have a wrestler on, we say, what is the legacy that you're going to leave on professional wrestling? Or, in 5 years, where do you see yourself? But obviously, we're, 15 years past the XFL. This documentary has reignited that people's, memories of the XFL, what it was like to go through it, and for new fans who are experiencing it, just kind of scratching their head along with the rest of us who like to look back at it. But what is the legacy of the XFL at the end of the day, and what do you hope people get out of this documentary?
Well, I hope they get the legacy out of the documentary, which is the legacy of the XFL is changed television sports forever. I mean, what it did was it introduced the idea of access. Years after the XFL, things like Hard Knocks and 24/7 came along, but those were born out of the idea that Vince stood up at a press conference and said, we're going to take the fans inside the game we love, which was not happening at that time. We take that for granted now. You take, the NFL Insider and NBA behind the scenes and Major League Baseball's dugout cam and interviews, all that stuff. All of that is born out of that 1 year in 2001 when the league burned very brightly and went away. The other thing I really wanted to drive home, and I think this is really important to Vince as well, is the film's meant to be a bit of a celebration of entrepreneurship. That this is what it is to be an entrepreneur. You go out, you fail, you dust yourself off, you get back up, and you go do something else. During the period of the XFL, when it was failing, Vince quietly bought, well, it wasn't quiet once it happened, but it was while he negotiated. He bought the WCW and ECW at that time and for once controlled all of wrestling in the United States, which had never been done before. So even while he's having this disaster on one side, he's still building a massive business, and he continues to innovate on the other side. That is what entrepreneurship is. That is what it is to be a creator and an inventor. And when people ask what it takes to become the biggest and best at business or working or whatever it is, the truth is it's a willingness and a comfort with failing so that you can move forward. My legacy is, I don't know if you know this, but I'm going to become the next Rock. So just you heard it here first, but that is really I'm eating my vitamins and I've built my iron paradise.
Well, you're the fall between the two icons. You got the Hogan stories, you got the Rock impression going for you, so you're kind of falling in between the two. But before we get to the big wrap and the big plug for the 30 for 30, which if you've seen any 30 for 30s, you know that it's going to go right in line with those great films. But what was it like to get hung up by Opie last week? Or I got to actually compare it. Was getting hung up on by Opie worse than the failed Rusty Tillman versus Jesse the Body Ventura feud? Go.
So I have a horrible me that accidentally hung up on him.
Oh.
So we did the call. We were supposed to do the call on my office line, but it wasn't connecting. So they called me directly on my cell phone, and my cell phone dropped out in my office. So I feel very bad. He emailed me. Of course, now he emails me. He emailed me afterwards to say, "Can we come into the studio?" But yeah, now his email works. Surprisingly, you know what? I'm a huge fan. I guess I said this enough times on that radio interview, so you know, I'm a huge fan of Opie, and I felt terrible. I was so glad to go on his show, but I felt terrible having to tell him that he missed his opportunity to be in the film.
It's crazy, but it was a great interview. It was very funny, but yeah, the Rusty Tillman, Jesse the Body. That'll be the next time we talk to you. But please give us the big plug for the 30 for 30. This was the XFL as well as where anybody who's listening to the Two-Man Power Trip of Wrestling can find anything in the world of Charlie Ebersol.
Well, tonight, Thursday, February 2nd, on ESPN at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, This Was the XFL will premiere on ESPN, and then you can watch it on the ESPN app or on demand anytime. And if you go to ESPN.com to 30 for 30, there are about 15 extra videos, including the Rusty Tillman, Jesse Ventura feud. We did about a 4 or 5 minute piece on that, which you can watch, that has exclusive interviews from both of them. And then after the show on ESPN's Facebook page, you can watch Facebook Live. I'll be interviewed by John Coachman. We'll be discussing the film with Rod Smart, He Hate Me, and Darren Ravel, talking about the business of the XFL. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me, Charlie Ebersol, on Instagram or Twitter. And you should check out my other shows like The Prophet.
Absolutely, 100%, Charlie.